Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So by the end of 30 minutes, we'll leave you with a brief experience and 3 tips to make feedback successful. The first thing we're going to do is take a few minutes to understand why feedback is so often difficult, what makes it so hard. And then we're going to do an improv activity to give you an opportunity to experience a transformative shift kind of in your paradigm or perception. And then leave you with 3 tips to make feedback successful. First, we're going to do a quick poll. There are 3 questions. Which do you prefer, giving feedback or receiving it? Which do you prefer, praise and recognition or critical feedback? And do you tense up to receive critical feedback? Or if somebody says, could I talk to you for a minute? Like, oh no. I feel like we need a little countdown timer. a little 1-minute music.
A little bit of.
Those are harder to answer, Sherry, than you might expect. They appear so simple.
They do, and they're not. And context is probably incredibly important. So we're asked what makes it difficult. We're asking you to narrow it down to a black or white decision. All right, about 20 more seconds. All right, we will end the poll and take a look at the results. So about 67% of this group prefers receiving feedback, which is the opposite. Oh no, it's not. It's in alignment, isn't it, Tony, with what we've seen before?
Yeah, I didn't see. I'm sorry, I didn't see the results on mine. Can you tell me what were the results?
Oh, they're not showing up?
I don't see them on my
share.
screen.
There we go. Now they should.
There we go.
About a third, 2/3 of people prefer to receive that feedback rather than give it. And that is what we've been seeing, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And which do you prefer, praise and recognition or critical feedback? And this is unusual because we usually see a higher percentage of people wanting critical feedback. And then it's pretty standard. Do you tense up when you're getting critical feedback? Yep, most people do. And part of that is that sense of we immediately shift you into a place where we're going to start to protect ourselves because we assume that critical feedback is going to be negative.
So I'm curious, in that last question in the poll, when you said that you tense up when we even think about the word feedback or somehow relive an experience around our feedback. So just can you move over to the chat for a minute and actually describe to me what tense means for you? How did you feel that in your body? Well, how did you recognize that as being tense? What happened for you? Would you mind going over to the chat and just kind of describing that feeling or sensation?
We're such a small crowd, Tony. Would it be okay to chat it through?
Absolutely. If you're comfortable doing that, absolutely.
Oh. I just wonder, it's funny. It's the critical part of the feedback that I found hard about that question. The critical part, if someone has constructive feedback, I think I'd be very open to that. But when it's critical, it just makes me, or if I have, and I guess this is the part about appreciative inquiry that I'm learning more about, is that how do you take something and say, well, what do we need more of to drag them, like, rather than the critical aspect, which makes everyone tense, or it just feels bad.
Feels bad, right? You kind of feel it in your hands. You can kind of feel it in your feet. Anyone else want to kind of add to that? And it's interesting because please, Sonia, would you mind adding?
Yeah, I was just going to say that for me, I usually feel like a squeeze in my stomach and my shoulders. And it's like almost like bracing myself for what's going to come next.
Kind of bracing yourself, right? So here's our offer, is that if you honor that, right, what ends up happening, that's why feedback is so important, because what happens is the way that it triggers others and ourselves, it is that crunching in. It typically is this experience. And so what Sherry and I have been discovering and playing with is actually these 3 steps. And the first one is really to pause. And what's fascinating is if we create a pause, what I'm using in terms of describing, create space between your response. Even just check in with yourself and say, wow, my body is acting this way. My body is telling this type of a story. And then the second thing is to just be able to breathe. So first we're going to pause and create space. The next thing that we're going to do when our body's doing that is to just take a breath. And I know in the short time, what we normally do is introduce a little bit more of a 4-box type of breathing technique that allows us to kind of let that go. So the whole point of breathing is let it go and start calming. So let's just take a minute, and I'm just going to take a few breaths on your own. Just follow your breath wherever you are now. Follow your inhalation and follow your exhalation. So just take a minute and kind of follow your breath. So we're releasing that, right? So even in conversation and talking about it, our bodies naturally did that. So what we're doing is breathing, kind of just becoming aware, creating this other level of awareness. And by doing that, Trini, you mentioned appreciative inquiry. The next piece, when we open that space and we create equanimity between our breath, our inhale and our exhale, we now can really get curious. We can get curious around what are the opportunities and what we call generative inquiry. What does that look like as potential that I wasn't even considering before I started the pause? So there's this really about what we call a kata or a habit. How do we, in time of a stimulus, something that triggers us, how do we stay curious and follow these 3 steps? Pause, breathe, and get curious. And we're going to kind of follow this theme throughout the next 30 minutes with you. And let's talk about what that means. So on the next slide, what we just described is really feedback is dynamic. And you mentioned depending on if it's critical, depending on if it's something that's positive feedback. So there's this dynamic piece around feedback that's really important. And if I had to circle a word on this slide, it would be emergent, right? So this is about how do we just allow it to emerge? And I love the actual photo that Sherry chose in terms of dynamic. Take a look at the flowers. Where are they growing? Towards the sun. Right? So if you see that bright spot on the slide, this is really about being in relationship to the energy. It's about being interactive. It's about being iterative. Every day is a little bit different in terms of growth and potential. And what does that look like in honoring? Every moment's going to be different, but still having that pattern of pause, breathe, and get curious. Sherry, do you want to add anything here in terms of dynamic?
Only that doing this by yourself is almost impossible because you can't see your own blind spots and you don't have anything to like bounce it off of. So part of the dynamic piece of this is the fact that it is in relationship. You need the other people giving you that reflection and the feedback.
Excellent.
It's the how that becomes the problem. So we would like to introduce an improv activity, and we need 2 volunteers. 2 people that are willing to just kind of play. And everybody else gets to observe and notice what you observe. What are you seeing and hearing? So,
Dora, Salini, do you feel like going ahead? I'm happy to jump in.
Let's do it.
okay,
Okay.
wonderful. Okay, so we would like the 2 of you together to plan a vacation. And the only stipulation is that whenever you add something following the other person, that you say yes, but.
Okay.
Okay.
So shall we dive in, Sherry?
Dive in. And this will be short, maybe a minute.
Okay. So Heini, I was thinking I'd like to take a hiking vacation.
Yes, but have you considered the seaside maybe?
Well, I haven't really considered the seaside out, or yes, but I think my preference would be to go to the mountains.
I know your preference is the mountains. Oh, yes, but what about trying something new?
Yes, trying something new would be nice, but I really do love going to the mountains.
Okay, we can pause. All right, let's just do a quick debrief. First, let's ask the 2 of you who were planning, Sohina and Trina, what was that like?
It's impossible.
Really restrictive because you have to
Yes.
think of something contradicting what the other person said.
Yeah, so
Unnatural.
yeah, so your planning is restricted, and it's very difficult, almost feels impossible is what you said. What did the rest of you notice? And if you don't want to open your mic, you can feel free to put it in the chat. What else? Oops,
Hi, I thought that they were because of the yes but rule, they could not look into possibilities, so they had to stick to a win-lose concept when they could have moved with if the rule was not there, then probably they could have had a win-win ending.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. And how would you describe the energy in that conversation?
Not very high.
Yeah, Doris is low, Latha
Yeah,
said not very.
circle. They were in circles, like.
Yeah.
Circular.
Did you happen to notice anything about their body language?
Yeah, they just kept running away.
Great observation, leaning away from. You got the sense that they were probably not going to end up on vacation together. All right, let's reverse this, or not reverse it, but kind of reverse it. This time you're going to plan a vacation. And this time add yes and before the other, right after the other person as you add your part of the plan into the conversation.
Okay, Latha, do you want to go ahead or shall I dive in?
Or was it?
Sorry. Yes, I would love to.
Okay.
Again, I would want to. I'm planning to go to Everest Base Camp for a vacation.
That's great. Yes, and I would love to join you.
Yes, imagine, we'll have to probably become fitter than what we are now, but that's so thrilling, isn't it?
Yes, and I know a place where I can get the right equipment from for this trip.
Yes, that's so good, and we could do the whole thing together.
Yes,
That would
and
be so nice.
I have a great book for you to read as well about trips to Everest Base Camp that I really like.
Okay, all right, great, wonderful, nice job. So Sohini and Latha, how was that for you? Well, how did that feel? How did that?
For me, it felt like it was a roller coaster. You know, what started out as something as a top of the hat thought process is actually getting into a plan, which probably I would not have done without a support.
Right. So it's moving forward and even in a direction
Yes.
you didn't maybe plan for. So Heini, how about
Absolutely.
what was your experience?
Yeah, I did. That's not the holiday I would think of, except that when she said it, I remembered this book that I had read, and I was really enthusiastic after reading that book that I could actually do Everest Base Camp. So all of those things came flooding, and I was like, oh, she's saying exactly the kind of thoughts that I had previously, and so it was exciting, I guess. Possibility.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that yes and opens doors, right? To like, oh, I had forgotten that so what, those of you who are observing, what did you notice that was different in this conversation?
The speed of the talking, much more energy.
Yeah, a lot more energy in the conversation and the voices. And what else?
Giving information. When Sohini gave the book, I just remember that it builds up and opens for information, for experience, for sharing. So
Yeah, so just it completely opens instead of diverges. Trina, did you notice anything else?
Yeah, I think I agree with Dora. There's a much better energy, and there is the creation of ideas then. It wasn't restrictive at all. In fact, it's just the opposite.
Right. So if you think about this as a metaphor around feedback, when we get into that protective space where we tense up and we're ready to defend ourselves against attack, there's that same kind of yes, but. I might take what your feedback in, but I'm going to defend. Versus both giving and receiving feedback from a place of yes and. So yes, around what did you do really well? And here are some additional things that might be helpful. Or yes, I realized that I didn't do that well. And I might try this the next time. What do you think? So that it shifts the entire energy, and then allowing the conversation to actually, just like here, to move forward and expand and make room for possibilities with enthusiasm instead of that sense of defensiveness. And that's just with changing a couple of words, but it's that same paradigm change for feedback. Tony, do you want to add anything?
Excellent. No, I'd like to build on that. I'd actually like to build on when you talk about the experience that you just had. We're talking about the next few slides. So who can we study and who does this really well, right? So we just had a micro learning activity to be able to say, wow, okay, there's a pretty profound, there's a paradigm shift between the two. And so what ends up happening is we can look at how do we develop that skill? How do we help others develop that skill? So two examples. The first one is Alan Alda in terms of communicating science. So I actually have a science background, and that's one reason that I'm so interested in studying feedback. So it's around listening and connecting. And with improv, it invites us to think about these skills around how do I become a better listener, and with the intent to connect and move forward, right? So we can borrow and learn from the techniques and the research from Alda's center. And then let's talk about, that's about how do we build skill and what does the training look like? The next one I'm really fascinated with. We just modeled it here with the improv. Do you guys notice the word that you used repeatedly in Sherry when she was debriefing? You guys responded with creativity. Think about, An organization that does this really well, it's Pixar, right? Disney's animation. And what they call is a plussing feedback system. So they have created a culture that daily they get into that space and they have rapid design cycles around whatever they're designing. And they create an environment just like the yes and. It's acknowledging and saying, yes, I like the way that you drew Woody's eyes. And what if they could actually roll? So the feedback and the way that they do this daily is always to help advance the designers in that animation in terms of performance and outcomes. So I think it's fascinating to say, where can we build our skill set? What does that look like in a systems view? And those are two examples that we wanted to share with you. And it's just fascinating to kind of reflect back on the experience we had today. What would it look like in your environment if everybody was coming from that space of creativity? Talk about appreciative inquiry and thinking about that future state. It's not just about the past, present, it's really driving us towards a creative and creative future.
So the idea that we want to leave you with for tips, it's one of the big ones is around having a mindset about feed forward. Instead of making feedback about the past, here's what you did wrong, or here's how you should have done this, make feedback about the future. Here's what's possible in the future. And it's a subtle shift, but it creates a radical shift. It creates that yes and space. If you're focused on the future, whether you're giving yourself feedback or somebody else, or whether you're receiving it, you can always focus yourself on the future, even if the other person is focused on the past. You can shift the dynamic just by the way you ask questions and the way you hold yes and yourself. And when you put all of this together, what we're really suggesting is a growth mindset. And the practice of pause, breathe, and get curious gives you that space that Tony was talking about to look for what else, yes, and to open up. And then if your feedback is always clear and aligned with an intention, what am I wanting to do with my feedback? Am I hoping, again, this is that leaning into the future. I want to help this person be more successful, be more clear, get that promotion that they were working on. So align your feedback with your intention, the reason you're supporting and wanting to give feedback to this other person that is future oriented. So focus on the future, not just about correcting the person, but about supporting some future state, which we're always moving into, or we're reinforcing the current one. And the third piece of effective feedback is to foster self-efficacy. The goal should be to support the other person in being able to be their best and achieve whatever it is they want to achieve. And so by asking questions instead of telling and engaging in that kind of yes and conversation, it builds capacity for others.
So with that spirit, we talk about make this soft skill easy, right? Why is it so hard, and why is it that our body responds, and why is it so important? And so we think about that experience that we just had is we do live in an uncertain world. So how do we honor that? You know, and the research actually shows us that when right now and are currently the way that we give feedback, that typically only 30% of that feedback is even effective. Think about that number for a minute, right? So 30%, what can we do to become more effective? How do we raise that number? The other one is another research point, awareness. So if I asked you, and if we asked the general population around how aware do you think you are, typically the responses are between 80 and 90% think that I'm pretty aware, when actually it's between 10 to 15% proficiency around awareness. So all of these are around what's the data telling us? How does that inform us to be able to have effective? And then what is our one daily practice? What is the practice that we can use? And so one of the things that I wanted to offer here is that it does matter. And what we're inviting you to do is join us in either a Conversations Worth Having boot camp, or what's happened too is Sherry and I've done a deeper dive in the importance of feedback. And what you can do is join a 4-hour session with us to kind of practice this, either on your own or with a team. I mean, we think it's that important that we're building out a whole workshop just around feedback. Sherry, do you want to add anything too? I know I was watching the time.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
Only that the the workshop is broken into 2 days. So it's 2 hours one day and 2 hours the next. We won't make it grueling with a 4-hour Zoom call. And then there's a discount code that we're offering of $100 off for attending this session.
So hopefully there was a tip, something in terms of, if you think about, here's my invitation for this last minute. We had just started off with a poll and we asked a binary question, right? It was very much yes, but. You guys even said, wow, it's hard to kind of answer that, right? If you could redesign the poll, I'm not asking you to answer it differently. What other questions might you ask? And how might you apply that in terms of the teams and the organizations, or even at your dinner table tonight? Is there another way, another perspective that we could look at feedback? That's the invitation. And what is it that you can do based on those 3 tips? Pause, breathe, and get curious.